Hey Rebels, welcome back to the channel. So Bitcoin just hit a new all-time high price. So I figured I might as well hop in here and make a video and see what we can see here. So a couple things that I noticed that I do like and I want to discuss quickly is during this rally, we've seen open interest increase, which is a good sign. Open interest basically is how much money is in leveraged positions. And so typically, if open interest is going up with the price, it's indicating that people have increased interest in taking leverage, which makes sense. So the last time, actually, I'll just go to the weekly because the last time I brought this up, and I think we have funding as well. That was another thing to look at. So um, things that I was seeing, I think it was right around here that I was discussing this in a little bit more depth, but I was seeing the aggregated open interest at pretty low levels. At the same time, the funding rates were very low. And if on a weekly, you can see that when the funding rates go negative, that was a very good time to be interested in the market, or very, very low levels of open interest. The last time we saw negative open interest was back here in the cycle, and we can see it's pretty much up only from there. And conversely, when you see open interest at really high levels, or excuse me, funding rates at really high levels, those are kind of times not to be wanting to get into the market. And so I think it was right before we actually printed this red negative funding rate. We were down in here in very, very low levels, also lower levels of open interest. And so what I do like seeing, I'll put this back on the daily, is that we're getting increased open interest with the price. If I go back during this time in Bitcoin's price history here, we can see as we were coming up here, we had this 3-day down signal, which was signifying that we were starting to see a slowdown and that we may not be seeing higher prices or much higher prices as double topping. But what we see, the earlier indication of this was as price was rising right here, open interest was falling, meaning people were using this rally to get out of their long positions. So that was kind of an early sign of potential weakness. But so I checked it today because, obviously, getting up to new all-time highs is a really big deal. But I wanted to see, well, are people using this rally to get out of their positions, or are they using it to increase their positions? And so far, what it looks like the data is showing is that, that we've had increasing open interest during this rally. So I do like that. That is a really bullish sign. We'll have to see what the price action does from here. We are starting to see the funding rates get elevated, meaning, this all kind of goes hand in hand where people are now, they weren't interested. They didn't like Bitcoin when it was 75K, but then it increased by $25,000 per coin. And now all of a sudden people are interested. So you have to be kind of basically doing the opposite of what the crowd is doing effectively is what I'm seeing there. So I won't show the other chart that I have been showing, our exchange volume chart, because it is a 7-day moving average, and so it is a little bit delayed, and we're still waiting for that higher low to form, and we don't have it yet. But on the day, the entire exchange volume has increased by 44%. So zooming in a little bit, we're seeing an increased volume while prices are going up. I do like to see that. The other thing too I've been keeping track of is the funding rate heat map, which I've mentioned in previous videos, but effectively, I don't know if I explained it very well, but you have the spot price, which is just the market price for an asset, and then you have a futures contract, and those don't always trade at the same price. So if people are getting more interested and more excited into the market, and they use more and more leverage to buy Bitcoin, the futures price can kind of creep away from the spot price. And as that happens, as an incentive mechanism, what they will do is they will charge people who are borrowing money to go long. They'll charge them more and more money to go long. So if things are way out of whack, the funding rates get really high, meaning you're gonna have to pay a lot in order to go long because it's basically been pushed so high beyond what might be considered fair value. And it's basically an incentive to take the opposite position because really what it means is if you go short, you're going to get paid that. And so, instead of having to pay 50% a year on the money that you borrowed to go long, you'll get paid 50% to go short. And so what people will do is they will buy spot and then short the futures. And so they'll get paid that 51%, and it's kind of a directionally neutral trade. That's kind of going into the weeds. But the main thing is, if you can see from here, we're in kind of cool territory. Nothing's overheated except for a couple fart coin, and there's a couple, but really what we don't want to see, what we want to see what we don't want to see is this. This was last December when things got really crazy, basically from that, yeah, the no, November into December time. You can start seeing how across the board things just started getting lit up, meaning more and more people were interested, more and more people were starting to use leverage. That kind of a positive feedback loop, and prices drove higher. And that's kind of what we're in the beginning stages of now. And so where that goes, no one knows. That's the whole point of this. You may look at this and be like, okay, it's just going to go straight up from here, just like it did back here, just vertical, so just straight vertical. We broke those highs, we went vertical, and that's basically what everybody's expecting. And I think if I zoom this back even further, um, you can see that sometimes this wasn't all-time highs, but it broke major resistance right here and went straight vertical. So that's usually kind of what people are expecting, is that this is just going to go straight vertical. But what I wanted to point out is that we do have this major trend line that I've been tracking for quite some time here, which would put resistance here at like 113. So people who are expecting this to just jump right up to 120, 130 may be surprised. We may get a pullback from here. I mean, the whole thing is we just don't know. The problem with waiting for a pullback is that if you'd have been waiting for a pullback during this time, you'd have never got it. And that's one of the reasons why prices do tend to accelerate during these times, is because everybody's been bearish this is all over, the cycle's shortened, all these different narratives saying that it's got to go to zero. There's a saying that bears sound smart and bulls make money. So yes, people who will give you all sorts of different reasons why the markets can't go up, that sounds smart, but the bulls are making money, right? Clearly, like if you'd been following the channel as well, I was getting very excited during these times because there was a lot of different signals that we were finding support, and there were other volume indicators and things like that were indicating that it was a potential structural low. Then we went into our overbalance of time and price. That basically confirmed that, meaning that any pullbacks from here likely to form a higher low and find support as well. So, if we come down from here, we got lots and lots of very strong support beneath the market. We don't need to be too concerned there. According to our speed line here, just from the trough here to the peak, we can see that this move is accelerated. That's typical as the cycle continues, because more and more new people get into the market that have basically been fading Bitcoin this whole time and ignoring it. They're basically forced to buy at higher prices. And the people who bought down here, I'm like, well, they're pretty hell bent on holding this thing for much longer. So, the people who were brave enough to buy down here are not going to sell up here. I mean, there is a trade there, and there will be resistance there. But overall, people who are using this as an opportunity to accumulate more are not going to sell right here. And so the people who want to buy up here are going to have to pay higher and higher prices. And that's just kind of how that goes. So waiting for a pullback can be really dangerous because you may not get it. And we're on the move now. So we will see. And if we do find a dip, well, then I would say that would be the buying opportunity for this particular leg. Bitcoin dominance is still really weak. USDT dominance that I've been tracking is still basically in a rock and a hard place. So we're not seeing any major pushes in the altcoins yet, but I do suspect that if and when we reach these levels and get more into price discovery, then that's when all the excitement will come back. Before, basically during inauguration, it was all over the news. All you could hear about was how strong Bitcoin was and how high it was going to go. Nobody was talking about it here. Everybody was talking about it here. If anybody was talking about it here, it was basically about the collapse of the entire world, how we were going to go down forever from here, and everything was collapsing, and the economy's weak and everything else. I have not really heard any excitement come back into the market at the same levels that they were, at the very beginning of the year. Very beginning of the year, everybody was convinced that Bitcoin this time's different. Bitcoin's going to 250K. Everybody's price targets increased substantially, and it just had to go higher because of this, X, Y, and Z. And now Bitcoin is at the same exact price that it was in January, and nobody's talking about it. It's just crickets. So I want to kind of, this is kind of anecdotal, but what I've noticed and what I've seen and what I've also, heard from other people who've been in the markets even longer is that typically these large news events come in during times when people who have large amounts to sell want to sell. So there's an old story about, I think it was, okay, now I'm going to forget the punchline. I think it was George Soros, and there was all these macro reasons that copper was going to do really well. And so basically, his people were like, okay, well, do you want us to go buy copper? And he was like, well, no, we're going to or go out there and sell or buy news articles say and talk shit on copper, basically. Because if you want to buy a fog ton of copper because you have inside information or you have an idea of global economics and the price of copper is just gonna, there's all these reasons that copper is going to go up in value. What you're going to do is you're going to have news articles talking shit about copper and how it's a lousy investment, and then you're going to buy as much as you can during these times right here. And basically what they were doing, so it's that same kind of thing. And in fact, there's evidence, actual evidence of this. JP Morgan has consistently been against Bitcoin pretty much since inception. And there's evidence that there was a news article or a news interview that he did, and it was basically just talking trash on Bitcoin and how it's a lousy investment and it's only for drug traffickers and all this other stuff. And the very next day, one of the subsidiaries of JP Morgan in some other country or whatever bought a fuck ton of Bitcoin, basically on that bad news. So he's dissing it, in public, and then behind the scenes they're buying it. So this is why you cannot watch the news for your information. It's going to get in your head. It's going to play with your emotions, and you're just not going to be on the right side of things. Because if somebody has, $100 billion of Bitcoin that they want to sell, it's pretty easy to spend a couple $1 million on an ad campaign saying how Bitcoin's going to $1 million to get an influx of interest and people in at the very tail end of this thing, coming in with their hopes and dreams too, wanting to make their $1 million and take their shot. But really, they're just selling into that volume, because if you don't have the volume to sell $100 billion worth of Bitcoin, I mean, how are you going to sell $100 billion worth of Bitcoin if you don't have $100 billion worth of interest, right? So those are things to be cautious of. And I just think it's interesting because it's just crickets. I mean, I haven't looked into all the news articles, but usually in my feeds and in the content that I watch, there's a lot more like newsreels that will be included in that content that they're creating, and I haven't seen anybody really talking much about Bitcoin printing, new all-time highs. So it's interesting, right? It's just something. It's like I said, it's anecdotal, but it's something to kind of pay attention to and be like, okay, well, what am I on the right side of this thing? If there's a lot of news articles saying how it's going to $1 million and there's a lot of hype and you're in extreme greed, well, then you're probably not on the right side of it. If you're down in these trenches and there's extreme fear in the market and there's lots of bad news articles, um, you know, buying there is probably going to be more beneficial than buying the good news. So anyway, a little bit of just kind of a tidbit there that I find really useful. Other than that, we'll just have to see how we go from here. Like, I mean, we can get rejected from here. The whole thing that really people don't tell you is that nobody knows what is going to happen on this side of the chart. What we can do is stack the probabilities in our favor. There's no more bullish place really to be than all-time highs. We have open interest increasing as the price is increasing, which is really bullish. The funding rates are not overheated, which is a good sign as far as the health of the market goes. And then we've had other signals, overbalance in time of price, signaling that any pullbacks from here will likely be find support, and that will be the structural higher low, and we want that structure, because it just gives us more information, right? It's like this gave us information right here. This structural low gave us information. It said, okay, the market is interested in buying, and buyers are stepping in to support prices at these levels, which if you just drew this trend line here, which is what I've been saying for forever. I think we're just retesting and going higher. How much higher, we don't know. But now that we have the structural low, price goes below that, well, it's going to tell us something, right? So anytime we form more structure, it just gives us more data to work with, which is good. So yeah, I think that's about all I have from here. I don't want to get too super into Elliott Wave, but Michael Bazzino is a wonderful analyst. Him and his brother Jason, they're both incredible analysts, and they use GAN analysis, which is what I use, and I'm a student of theirs, and they're just incredible. So anyway, if you watch some of his content, he'll go into more depth on the Elliott wave, but effectively, what we can effectively really what it is that as markets go in any direction, really, if they're going up in the macro, there will be five waves that happens in, and those larger structures can be broken down into substructures. So each one of those single legs can also be broken down into a five-way structure. So if we are going into a into a wave five right now, let's see. So you could basically be, oh, anyway, he's got it all mapped out, and I don't have. I've also mapped it out on different charts, but instead of me struggling through that, what you can just trust me on is that what we're anticipating is that this is a wave one of a five-wave structure on the larger macro final push. And generally, with commodities, they can have very explosive runs on their last leg. And so, I mean, we did really good with our trading because we basically got in near the lows of wave one. And so if you can imagine, when this pulls back, that wave two is really a phenomenal entry there, because wave three is usually the most powerful and largest of the waves. And so, we're early to that move, but we're very late in the cycle. So the risk is much higher this stage of the cycle going all in on anything. The time to go all in on Bitcoin was, probably around 25K once we got out of this bottom, and you can imagine, I mean, 25K, and that's a 4x. I mean, where else can you do that? That's more than 100% a year. You just can't do that anywhere. So anyhow, but what I am looking for is somewhere, whether we hit this resistance here, come back down for the entry of a wave two, that wave three is going to be very explosive. And that's when I imagine that a lot of the attention will come back into the altcoin space. So we have a lot of early entries on some altcoins, and we're just basically just chilling, and we have plenty of good support and resistance to keep an eye on that will give us signals. And, printing a new all-time high price is pretty powerful sign. So I think that's all we have for today. We'll just keep track, and I'll have another weekly update. We'll see where the weekly and the monthly closes here, because we're getting close to some monthly closes as well. And we'll just see what the charts have to say for us. But other than that, looking pretty goddamn bullish. Been bullish since down here, and that's been working out for us. So, the markets are quiet. Markets are quiet, even with Bitcoin printing an all-time high, things are still pretty quiet. So that's a good, healthy sign. When we start to get up into these levels of resistance, and it's all you can hear about on the news, well, that might be cause for concern. So anyhow, we'll just keep tracking. New all-time highs, bullish, bullish.